class. In this video, we are starting with long-term memory. Long-term memory is the continuous storage of information. There are two big ways that short-term and long-term memory differ from each other. Long-term memory has an unlimited time frame, whereas short-term, 20 to 30 seconds. You can remember something unless there's forgetting or some sort of problem for your whole life. The other big difference is the capacity. Whereas you have that magic number for short-term memory, 7 plus or minus 2, for long-term memory, it is unlimited. You can keep sticking stuff into your long-term memory. You don't need to remember or forget your 16th birthday to remember your 18th. Just keep adding memories. A couple of ways, one big way that you move information from short-term memory to long-term memory is through rehearsal. That's that conscious repetition of information to be remembered. And so that process of using rehearsal to move information from your short-term memory to long-term memory, that is called memory consolidation. Saying something over and over or studying something over and over. If you study your notes every day for 10 minutes, you are trying to use memory consolidation. Associative memories or networks are the fact that memories are organized in semantic networks. Remember semantic meaning. So related, associated memories are stored together. You kind of have concepts arranged hierarchically in your mind, and related concepts are linked. If two concepts are associated more often, they go together more often, that link is going to be stronger in your mind. And then, so if you remember one thing, it's easier to remember the other things in that associative network. If you remember, what would be an example? If you remember something red and then you remember fire trucks because you saw a lot of red fire trucks when you were a kid, that'd be an associative network. And so that process of remembering one thing and so you remember the related concepts, that is called spreading activation. That's what that term is. Some of your memories can only be recalled through prompts. It's harder to just pull it from your mind. You have to be prompted. And these can be, your long-term memories are divided into two different types. You have explicit and implicit long-term memories. For explicit memories, these are also called declarative memories. This is what you consciously try to remember and recall. This is what you know that you know. Explicit, declarative memories can be divided into episodic and semantic. Episodic are information about events that you have personally experienced. Your memory of your high school graduation is an episodic memory. Your memory of your 18th birthday was an episodic memory. Semantic, declarative, explicit memories are knowledge about words, concepts, language-based knowledge, and facts. Remembering the definition of semantic memories is a semantic memory. If you remember the capital of Delaware, that is a semantic memory. So those are ones that you can easily talk about. You can be explicit about it, you can describe it, it is easy to come to mind, and you know if you know the capital of Delaware or not. Implicit are different. Implicit long-term memories are also called non-declarative. These are memories that are not part of your consciousness. It is hard to think about them. And so these are often procedural memories. It's how you do things. If you know how to ride a bike, that is an implicit memory. If you know how to drive stick shift, that is an implicit memory. Knowing how to tie your shoes is an implicit memory. One easy way to know if something is implicit or explicit is how easy is it to describe that memory, that knowledge to somebody else. For example, if you're teaching someone to tie their shoe, Can you describe how to do it with your hands behind your back, not using your hands at all? No, it's really hard because it's an implicit memory. You kind of just do it, you don't explain it. Or, for example, driving stick shift, which probably none of you all do. It's a lost art. But I drive stick shift, and there are some countries still where you kind of have to drive stick shift. Most of the cars are manual, they're not automatic. I was trying to teach a friend how to drive my car. And at this point, I'd been driving a stick shift for over a decade. And he almost broke my poor engine while I was teaching him because it's not something that's easy to describe. You kind of just have to know how to do it. Like riding a bike. Those are all going to fall into that implicit category. That's what we mean when we say it's not part of your consciousness. It's hard to talk about. The next thing we are going to go over is retrieval. For retrieval, this is the act of getting information out of memory storage and back into conscious awareness. Again, going back to this, we have your long-term memory. If you are going to remember something, to think about something that's in your long-term memory, basically what you're doing is you're moving it back to your short-term memory briefly so that you can consciously be thinking about it. So retrieval is that process. Okay. For retrieval, there are 3 ways to retrieve information. You can use recall, recognition, or relearning. So let's go over these. Recall is when you access information without cues. For example, if you just have to pull something out of thin air, like name, what would be a good example? Name all the Star Wars movies, which by the way, I don't know what they are. But that would be recall. Like, don't look it up, don't Google it. I'm not going to give you a list of possible Star Wars movies. Can you name every Star Wars movie that has been created? Just pulling it out of your memory. That would be recall. Recognition is when you identify information that you have previously learned after encountering it again. This is going to be if I had a whole list of possible Star Wars movie names and you had to see if you could circle all the ones that are actually Star Wars movie names. That is going to be recognition. Can you recognize information that should be stored in your memory? And then relearning is learning information that you have previously learned. And when you do that, you learn it faster the second time. And so that is a sign that you never really forgot it. It was still there somewhere in your mind. For example, what's an example? For example, when I was in college, I was a French minor. I lived in Rwanda for a while. I spoke very good French. And then, I didn't speak French for 15 years. And thought I forgot basically all of it, especially then I learned Spanish. And we'll talk about how that screws it up later. So I, don't know French, I would say. However, I started to watch a series in French and started studying French a little bit again just to see if I could learn it again. And it came back fast. I hadn't actually forgot it. It was just sort of in a place that was hard to get in my memory. That's that relearning. It was still there somewhere because it's coming back very quickly now that I'm trying to learn it again. So if you learn something a second time, you learn it fast, that's a sign you never totally lost it to begin with. So question for you. What, if you were taking a test in class, which type of retrieval are you using if you have a short answer test? and which type are you using if you have a multiple choice test. So for these types of retrieval, recognition is easier than recall. One way to, because multiple choice is going to be a whole lot easier than a bunch of short answer questions. And one way to think about it is that for recall, you kind of have to do two things. You have to think of all possible options for what could be stored in your mind and then choose what's actually stored in your mind. For recognition, that first step's done for you. Here are all the possible options. Can you recognize what should be stored in your mind? So recognition is easier than recall. Okay, so the next thing to do is to talk about the brain and how that connects with memory. The first way is with the amygdala. The amygdala plays a part in how memories are stored because storage of memories can be affected by stress hormones. And remember, the amygdala is connected with strong memories. And so that storage of strong memories is connected with the amygdala as well because the stress hormones are being released. So the amygdala can help with that memory consolidation, and it seems to help with encoding of memories at a deeper level if they are emotionally arousing. So if you have a very emotional event, you remember it vividly, the amygdala is helping with that. For the hippocampus, it helps with moving. Well, the hippocampus is where your memories get stored before they move to their permanent location. And so you can think of memory consolidation, memory consolidation as finding that permanent location, getting something into your long-term memory forever. And what happens at the neurological level is that when you've decided this is something I want to store long-term, it hangs out in the hippocampus. And then what happens is when you sleep, that moves from your hippocampus to its permanent long-term location. And the reason we know that that is what happens is that they took a bunch of rats, they taught them to go through a maze, and then they divided them into 3 groups. One group, right after they learned how to get through that maze, had their hippocampus removed. And then they went to sleep. Woke up the next day, they'd forgotten how to get through the maze. Group 2 learned to go through the maze. They were allowed to sleep. When they woke up, their hippocampus was removed. Then they were stuck back in the maze. They knew how to get through the maze. Group 3 was the control group. They were taught how to get through the maze. They slept, woke up, they could go through the maze. So basically what happens is when you are sleeping, that is when those memories go from the hippocampus to their permanent location. Because for that first group, the rats who had their hippocampus removed before they slept, it couldn't move to that long-term location. It was still stuck in the hippocampus, and so they forgot how to go through the maze. It was no longer a long-term memory because the part it was still stored in, because they hadn't finished going through that memory consolidation, was taken out. So the hippocampus is important for that. It also does things especially with spatial memory, just in general. So like going through a maze. That's where, or it's connected with spatial memories as well. And so because it's sort of the way station for permanent locations, if you have some sort of damage to your hippocampus, it will affect your ability to create new long-term memories. And so we'll talk about that a little bit later when we talk about Clive wearing. But it is connected with, well, not just Clive wearing, you'll see a video of him. But someone we've talked about before as well, when we talked about HM in the neurological chapter, when we talked about the hippocampus, he had his hippocampus destroyed to help with seizures, and so he lost the ability to create new long-term memories. His memory only lasted for a minute, and then it would sort of reset itself. The cerebellum is in charge of things like implicit memories, like conditioned responses. When they damaged the cerebellum in rabbits, they lost the startle reflex, the blink reflex, if you puff air in their faces. So it's connected with some implicit memories. And it's associated with some semantic tasks as well, things you do with meaning. And then finally, neurotransmitters play a part in memory. We're still kind of figuring it out. The arousal theory says that strong emotions trigger strong memories because of the hormones, like stress hormones, that are released that will strengthen a memory. For example, glutamate helps us to remember stressful events later on. One thing connected with this, I said I would mention it before, it's flashbulb memories. Flashbulb memories are clear recollections of important events. The things that are going to become a flashbulb memory usually have national significance or personal significance, like a car crash, your graduation. Oh gosh, you guys weren't born yet probably. 9/11 for your parents would be a flashbulb memory. Maybe January 6th for you all might be a flashbulb memory if you know where you were, if you remember that day. That could be one. So it's basically something really important happens, and again, let me go back to our trusty graph. It is so important that it is a version of automatic processing. Your brain says, record this, it is important, and it goes straight to your long-term memory. You don't have to try, you don't have to make an effort, it just automatically goes there. So that is flashbulb memories. And that is it for this slide. The next one, oh, my dogs, is problems with memory. So this is kind of we'll do this and then some study tips and we'll be done with the chapter. One problem with memory is amnesia. It's the loss of long-term memory that occurs as a result of disease, physical trauma, or psychological trauma. You can have anterograde amnesia or retrograde amnesia. Anterograde amnesia is when you can't remember new information, but you can remember what happened before your injury. And so one example of this is Clive Waring. And so I will show you a video of him now.
Oh, darling, I didn't know you were here. What have you got there?
I brought you some plates.
Oh, I prefer your kisses. Aren't ladies better than men?
I think so, yes. I'd go along with that.
Oh, good.
Would you like a Danish pastry?
It's a lovely idea.
Oh, would you like one?
I would, actually.
Oh, good. We've got enough too, that's marvellous.
Yes, one each.
That's good.
Here, one, Mike.
Oh,
Yes,
thank you very
visitors
much. Sorry,
first.
they're rather large, aren't they?
And
Just
so,
a
ladies
second.
second.
Thank you.
Thank you. Take the small.
Oh, this is enormous. Very difficult to hold,
Thank you.
actually, isn't it?
Yeah.
Well, have a serviette.
Oh, that's it.
Make it
Oh,
easier.
that sounds like a male name. Serviette who?
Serviette.
Yes, sir. Starts
Oh,
with
sir.
Serviette, yes.
One of the things that characterises Clive's day is that he continually makes entries in his diary. Now I say makes entries in his diary rather than keeps a diary, because in fact he's not keeping the diary. It is an inner compulsion to record the momentous event of waking up, because Clive's perception of his own condition is that because he has no memory whatsoever up to the current 10, 20 seconds, or maybe half a minute, depending on whether there have been distractors, any proactive interference. On the whole, his conscious working span memory is that current minute. So everything else behind the minute is blank. So everything until now is unknown and is void. So he uses the analogy of feeling as if he has just woken up. He says it's like just waking up for the first time. It's like just becoming conscious. It's as if I have been unconscious for however many years. And because this is a continual state, unless he's actually engaged on a conversation or on playing Patience of Solitaire, which he does a lot, or on playing the piano, or on taking a walk, unless his mind is elsewhere engaged, that is his experience of life, which is, oh, it's as if I've just woken up. Oh, you're the first person I've seen. Oh, I haven't, and it's this amazement that from, I mean, can you imagine what would it be like if you were unconscious and you just came to, but you didn't have a lot of people around your bed saying, oh, you've been unconscious, you're in hospital. You've just got people eating a meal or watching TV as if nothing has happened. So he is habituated to that condition. He realizes that it's not surprising, but he uses that as an analogy for the experience of having no memory. It's as if I've just woken up. And because for him it is momentous, he has to write it down, and he has to write it down on any available surface. If the diary is in front of him, he will write it down there. He will record the time, 10:50 a.m., awake first time, 10, and then he looks at the previous entry, which was 10:48 a.m., awake first time, and he says, no, I wasn't awake then, that wasn't me, that wasn't proper awakeness. This is the first real awakeness. So he goes through the diary, scoring out previous entries and underlining the current new entry, because this now is the real awakeness. All the previous awakenesses are unknown to me.
I've nothing to say about it. It's just like death. No thoughts of any kind, no dreams, no difference between day and night, no sight, no sound, no taste, no touch, no smell, exactly like death. No difference between day and night. No thoughts, nothing. No dreams, nothing at all.
How long?
Any question you have is to answer, I don't know. There's nothing to say. No dreams, no sight, no sound, no taste, no touch, no smell, nothing at all, no thoughts, nothing.
Since how long ago?
2 years, that's all I know. Whole time I've been ill, nothing at all, no thoughts, nothing.
What's it like now?
I can see. First time. First time I had any evidence I was alive.
And do you feel sort of normal now?
Yes. Since I sat down here, I don't remember sitting down here.
You don't remember sitting down?
No, I've never seen any human being now. I can see you fully of you now. There's no touch, no smell, nothing at all.
Do you know what happened to you?
No,
Any idea?
no idea at all. Just like death.
Do you know how long you've been like
No
this?
idea, just lived like years, that's all.
Any idea what year you got ill?
No.
Have a guess.
Sometime in the 80s.
Sometime in the 80s, yes.
That's all I can say.
Early 80s, mid 80s, late
No idea.
80s?
Can't remember.
Guess?
Middle 80s.
Middle 80s, yeah. That's correct. And do you know what year it is now?
No.
Have a guess.
It was in the 90s, I suppose.
Yeah, how far in would you
No
say?
idea. I couldn't, anything between 91 and 99, I don't know.
You've no feeling for that? No.
no.
But it's now 1998.
Good.
Any idea what month it is? Sorry, have a look out the window.
No, it looks like about March, April, no, February, March, something like that. February, March.
It is April. You're
Very
right first time, yeah. So whose birthday is it next month?
Mine.
Yep.
And my brother.
Any idea how old you'll be?
93,000.
No.
No?
How old do you think really?
21.
No. How old do you really how old do you feel?
22.
You feel 22, and how old do you think you are?
67.
No.
No?
Do you really think you're
I
67?
don't know, no idea what it is. No clue. It could be 90 or 100, all I know about it. No difference in day and night, no dreams, nothing at all.
Do you think your hair's grey or
No idea,
white?
I've never seen it.
And the next type is retrograde amnesia. That is the loss of memory for events that occurred prior to the trauma. This can kind of be seen as dissociative fugue as well. There's a psychological trauma that can cause retrograde amnesia that you'll learn about in chapter 15. But this is, you forget your name. You forget who you are. You forget, someone you've known for only 3 years because you don't remember the past 3 years of your life, but you remember before that, whatever. But before your whatever trauma happened, you forget at least a chunk of time before that. So, a couple other problems with memory. In general, the formulation of new memories is called construction. And when you bring up old memories, so when you move a memory from long-term storage, you retrieve it to your short-term memory so you can think about it, that we call reconstruction. Because in that process of remembering old memories, they are susceptible to change. One example of this is especially like flashbulb memories. So they've done, oh gosh, I can't remember who did it, but they did an experiment based on September 11th, asking people, what do you remember from that day? And they asked them like the day after 9/11, and then they went back 5 years later, 10 years later, and people felt what they were saying, this is what I remember happened that day. Like it felt like a really strong memory to them. They were sure this is what happened because those flashbulb memories are strong memories. But as they got farther away from the event, the memories changed. What people were saying, this is what I remember happened to me on September 11th, it changed as time went on because they would talk about the memory with other people. They would say, oh, where were you on 9/11? What were you doing? And then in that process of hearing other people's versions, basically it modified their version of their own story. It is possible to change your long-term memories. It could be total accident, or it could be kind of on purpose. Suggestibility describes the effects of misinformation, the on-purpose version of changing long-term memories, from external sources that leads to the creation of false memories. So false memory can either be a totally new memory is implanted in your brain, or it can be that your memory of an event changes, so the way you remember it is not exactly what happened. And this is connected with the misinformation effect, which is after the exposure to incorrect information, a person misremembers the original event. So that is changing your memory of it. This is one reason why eyewitness testimony can be so bad. It can cause problems if you have the misinformation effect because of what the police told you, or hearing about the crime on the news and you hear other people's versions of it. It can affect how you identify who you think the perpetrator is. And one of the most famous people who studies this is Elizabeth Loftus. And so now I'm going to show you a short video of her talking about her research.
One of the things that I and my colleagues did is to try to get people to remember that they met and shook hands with Bugs Bunny at Disneyland. This would be impossible because Bugs is a Warner Brothers character and wouldn't be allowed at Disney.
Okay.
Yeah. So how do we get people to believe that? We give them an ad to evaluate. So here's a fake ad for Disney, and you can see Disney and the castle, and there's Bugs. And they review the ad. They just tell us how much they like it. Do they like the colors? Do they like the layout? But later on, when we say, tell us about one of your childhood trips to Disney, which characters do you remember meeting? Do you remember meeting Mickey Mouse, Minnie Mouse, The Little Mermaid, Bugs Bunny? We will get lots of people to tell us they remember meeting Bugs. Oh. And then when they get pressed for details, they'll say they shook his hand, they'll say they touched his tail, they'll say he was eating, one said he was eating a carrot, one said, a few said he said...
So it becomes real.
It becomes real. They embellish it with detail, and it looks every bit like a real memory.
Yeah.
Even though it couldn't have happened.
And so, in addition to, memories being modified, you can also have the creation of new memories. This is the false memory syndrome. It's when you recall a false autobiographical memory. You think something is in your mind. It's not actually there. And so there was a whole rash of these in the 80s, especially with kids who remembered being abused at daycare centers, and they weren't. Like some people even went on trial. These were totally false memories. They had been unintentionally implanted in these kids' heads during questioning or during therapy. The kids were not actually abused. Okay, next issue with memory. I'm actually going to make me go away for a second. Which of these is the real penny? Okay, so the answer is A. In God we trust at the top, liberty on the left, number on the right, and he is facing to the right. Yes, that was A. So A is the right answer. Chances are you got that wrong. So why did you get that wrong? That is an encoding failure. This is when you don't even put the information into your memory to begin with. You don't remember what a penny looks like because who cares? You remember the details about a penny that are essential. Its size, its color. You don't need to know where the date is on the penny, so you never encoded it into memory in the first place. Encoding failure is one of Schachter's 7 sins of memory. So there are 7. We're going to go over here. Encoding failure is one. Forgetting is another. This is loss of information from long-term memory. You just lose. It might still be in your memory somewhere, but basically you've lost a means to find it. You've lost the path to that memory. Transience is when memories fade over time. Ebbinghaus does a lot of research on this with what he calls his forgetting curve. Actually, I'm going to make this bigger for a minute just so you can see it. So this is, he had people memorize words, vocab, and then it was how much they remembered. For this forgetting curve, you lose 50% in the first 20 minutes, and then 70, almost just over 60% kind of in the first day, and then it sort of tapers off after that. Most forgetting occurs quickly. When we talk about ways to remember better, we will fix that actually. We'll talk about a way to help this forgetting curve. But that transience is, it just fades over time. Absent-mindedness is when you have breaks in attention, your focus is elsewhere, and so you don't remember because you weren't paying attention. Blocking is when you can't access stored information. It's there, but you can't quite remember it. We call this also, besides blocking, it's also called the tip of the tongue phenomenon. And so what I want you to do is watch this fast video about the tip of the tongue phenomenon.
How about,
Ever been asked a question
in ancient Egypt, they had like a sacred beetle. Do you know the name of that?
where you know the answer, but you can't quite get it out?
You're going to say it, I'm going to punch myself.
McMaster University cognitive psychologist Karen Humphreys studies this tip-of-the-tongue phenomenon. She's now found that when you get stuck, you're better off just giving up.
You're spinning your tires in the snow. You're just digging yourself in deeper.
She and her colleagues showed volunteers questions which they either knew, didn't know, or had on the tip of their tongue.
It starts with an M.
For those, people had either 10 or 30 seconds to struggle for the word before being shown the answer.
Metronome.
2 days later, the researchers tested everybody again.
The longer they stayed in that tip-of-the-tongue state on the first day, the more likely they were to get into a tip-of-the-tongue state on that word on the second day. So they've just done all that much extra learning of that errorful state. And so they're more likely to get into that hole again the next time.
Humphrey says that's important for students who may be better off looking up an answer rather than struggling for it while studying. And as far as that Egyptian bug...
Scarab.
The scarab.
Scarab. You got it, yeah.
Scarab.
It was in there.
I'm Brad Closa.
more of the sins of forgetting. We have misattribution. You confuse the source of your information. Sometimes this is also called source amnesia. You forget where you learned something. Or, for example, if you are talking to a friend later and you say that you saw a TED video about flashbulb memories. It wasn't a TED video, it was this class. That would be misattribution. Suggestibility comes from someone else asking leading questions. That's what we just talked about with that misinformation effect. And bias is your feelings or view of the world distort your memory of past events. The way you basically remember things the way you want to remember them. And then finally, the last of these 7 sins of memory is persistence, which is when you keep remembering something and it interferes with your ability to concentrate on other things. You've got a song stuck in your head or something traumatic happened and it just keeps coming to mind. That's persistence. Next problem with memory we're going to talk about, not technically some of the sins of memory, just other issues, are interference. You can have proactive interference or retroactive interference. Proactive interference is when old information hinders the recall of newly learned information. And retroactive is the opposite. It's when new information hinders the recall of older information. For example, for proactive interference, oh gosh, I wear a watch. And if I forget to wear my watch one day, I'm still always looking at my wrist to see the time, even though it's not there. That new information, you're not wearing a watch today, is affected by that old information of I always wear a watch, and so I'm going to keep looking at my watch. Or for retroactive interference, this is like how I learned French, and then I learned Spanish, and so it's difficult to remember French words because Spanish comes to mind instead. This new information, the Spanish, affects my ability to remember the French. That's retroactive interference. And now we'll focus on more positive stuff. How to improve your memory. One is rehearsal. Again, we talked about that. You repeat something so that it can get stored in your long-term memory. Another study tip, distributed practice. This is how you help with that Ebbinghouse's forgetting curve. Distributed practice is when you break up your studying. You study 15 minutes every day versus pulling one all-nighter. If you break up your studying, you will remember it better. Chunking is when you organize information into manageable chunks. Like, for example, if you're trying to remember someone's phone number, you're going to remember the area code, and then you'll remember the next 3 digits, and then you'll remember the last 4 together. It helps you, instead of trying to remember all 10 numbers just in a row, you break it up into manageable chunks. That's chunking. Elaborative rehearsal is when you think about the meaning of new information and its relation to knowledge already stored in your memory. If you give it meaning, it helps you. One study tip for this is think of your own examples of the definitions. If you can apply it to your own life, give it meaning, you will remember it better. Or put definitions in your own words. It'll come to mind easier. You can also use mnemonic devices. These are memory aids. They help us organize information for encoding. So, like remembering the colors of the rainbow, Roy G. Biv, that's a mnemonic device. And then finally, last study tips for you, remember the levels of processing. Information stored at a deeper level is remembered better. Give it meaning. That semantic level is a deeper level. Make sure the stuff makes sense. You can use acronyms. The word, which is when the word formed by the first letter of each of the words you want to remember, like Roy G. Biv is going to be an example. Or when I say to help you remember the triarchic theory of intelligence, remember thinking CAP, C-A-P, for creative, analytical, practical intelligence. That's an acronym. You can use an acrostic, which is when you make a phrase of all the first letters of a word. I remember when I learned to play piano, and this was in the 80s. So I remembered even George Bush drives fast, because George Bush Sr. was the vice president at the time. But that's an acrostic. You make a phrase with it. Or you can also use jingles, rhyming tunes that contain words related to the concept. That will also help you with your studying. By the way, all these acronyms, acrostics, and jingles, these are all mnemonic devices. And that is it for this chapter.